Actually, I'm working on something really cool. So basically, when you have storms on the sun, you might get a solar flare or a CME, which is a coronal mass ejection. Something happens on the sun that sends a big burst to Earth, right? And what happens is you get all these particles, and they're actually just like protons and electrons, and they come and they just shower the Earth. So they're impinging on all the neutral atmosphere, so just the air, the upper atmosphere and everything. And what happens is you get currents actually through the atmosphere. And those currents, if the storm is big enough, can actually come in at a lower and lower altitude. And so this is just like having a current, running through a wire that's maybe going to your TV or your radio. And what happens also is these currents can then induce other currents on the ground. So even though they're kind of floating up in the air there, they can cause currents on the ground, and that can cause corrosion in pipes. It can cause maybe transformers to melt down. There are big, big effects that we see sometimes. My brother and my grandma used to always sit down together, and this was when we were kids, like 6 years old, and they just talk about space. And my grandma always, thought she was born in the wrong time, and she used to say, I would have been an astronaut, but I was born too early and all this stuff. And so hearing this stuff over and over, made me start to think about it a little bit. And when you hear something so much, you either tend to love it or you hate it. And I guess I started to love it a little bit just because it was so novel and everything was so new. But then another thing that happened is she used to buy us these logic problem books. And I just remember sitting down and doing them, and I would just eat it up, and I was just so excited to do them and finish the books and everything. So I knew kind of at that point that maybe engineering was the right track for me. It's a struggle sometimes because, especially being a woman in engineering, there's very few of us. But at the same time, that can be really encouraging because then you have more of an opportunity to make a name for yourself. But yeah, I found that aerospace was very interesting because there's a whole frontier out there, and there's so much exploration to be done. And if you think back in history, that really the driving force between, man going out and breaking new boundaries and stuff was his need to explore and to go and to visit these other continents, that they weren't sure were there at all, and find waterways and all those things. And space is just something that is barely touched. We've barely touched it so far. So you really, you have an opportunity to actually contribute a lot to the field. But I know that sometimes I go to sleep and I wonder, wow, have I worked so hard with no outcome? Sometimes you can work and work and work on a project and then find, you have no results so far. But when you really, really push through stuff, you always start to find answers to your questions. And sometimes they weren't the answers you were looking for at all. But in the end, all of those answers are contributing to society, helping people progress and move on and learn new things about the world and about other worlds, hopefully, more in the future. But yeah, so stick with your dream.